All right, hi everybody. Thank you for coming to this session. Before I start, I just want to caveat that the phrase real world is actually very hard for me to say quickly. So if you hear me say things like real world gaming, that means real world gaming. So unfortunately for me today, I'm here to talk to you about real world gaming. I'm Serena Chang. I'm a product manager on the Google Maps platform team. And specifically within real world gaming, today I want to talk to you about how mobile games will revolutionize the way that we see location data at Google, and also how location data will change the way that mobile games are played. So when I was growing up, maps, or this idea of location, and games were very separate things. Maps were something that was just this nice folded rectangular piece of paper in our car's glove compartment that we took out when we were going on road trips to places we didn't know. And I had this talent of really not knowing how to fold up the map back in the way that it was supposed to be folded. It's just very hard to follow the creases. So for me, maps was this crumpled piece of paper that goes into your glove compartment. In games, it was something that we played at home. I would play Minesweeper until my dad would tell me to go recite the multiplication times tables, which I also found was a game, or got talked into believing was a game. But these lived in very separate worlds. Maps served this utility purpose. Games were for fun. I do think math is fun. Maps were something we used on the go. Games were something that we played at home. And so these things were very separate, but that was roughly 15 years ago. And things are really different now. So today I'm going to talk you through both how the game world and the real world are evolving, and how at Google, we're trying to help game developers turn the actual real world into a playground, both in terms of game interactions with the real world, as well as how to style the real world in Unity. And then I want to show you a little bit of what our developers are building in hopes that it can inspire some new ideas as well. So let's start by talking about how games have evolved. Raise your hand if you have played this game or know what this game is. Okay, most people have played Pong. It was a 1972 game. This game world was very simple. It all lived on a two-dimensional screen, and it was just one screen. Now, fast forward a few years to Super Mario Brothers, where we have multiple game worlds, but still on this 2D screen. And then, now if you look at today, we have an increasing demand for game worlds to become increasingly realistic and three-dimensional. And a lot of the technology over the past 40 plus years have really made it able for game developers to develop these richer and more immersive experiences. And we're seeing that demand in games of today. So at Google, when we were looking at the Maps team, this clicker is, we're finding that game developers are investing a relentless amount of effort into modeling the real world, almost as much as we are doing, and it's our exclusive job to model the real world. And so we were thinking about how we could help that. When you're building a real world by hand, it's very impressive, but it's also very expensive. So one example of this is Grand Theft Auto 5. At launch, it was one of the most rich and beautiful and immersive game worlds. But at launch, it was roughly the size of Manhattan. And so what if we could help this type of manual game world building, but build it at scale, and help game developers create these worlds in a non-manual way so that they don't have to sacrifice detail with size or speed. We want to focus on the mobile gaming market specifically. I don't really need to convince this audience of that, but the mobile gaming market is huge. It's over 50% of the gaming market, and it's growing faster and faster year by year. And just as an industry, mobile games will hit $138 billion this year. So there's a huge opportunity there. So games is something that you're all familiar with. And I want to swing to the other side and talk about maps and location a little bit. So 15 years ago, when I was growing up, these maps were very static and they were on paper. We had to pull them out of our glove compartment if we wanted to go anywhere. And then maps became digital, but it was still very static. So you had to enter the address of where you wanted to go. You had to tap the magnifying glass if you wanted to search or zoom in, and you have to manually pan it. And if you want directions somewhere, you had to print it out and then take it with you as you drove somewhere. And it wouldn't account for these traffic that was happening on your road or these road closures that were happening. But then smartphones happened, and location became much more personal. We started using it for a lot more things around us, figuring out what to eat and where to hail a ride. Location, suddenly our smartphones and our maps knew where we were and even what direction we were facing. And so it became a lot more dynamic this way. And then with the advent of big data and machine learning and all of these tech buzzwords, we got real-time services. We now use our maps not only once a few times a year, but we use it on our normal commute home to check if traffic has changed or if there's a road closure. And so this evolution from static to dynamic to real-time has made maps something that we use once every few months to constantly every day. I've been traveling a lot lately, and I was counting the times I was using Google Maps, and I was definitely typing to Google Maps much more than I was typing to any of my best friends, which is very sad to think about, but a very useful fact for this presentation. And if we think about it, location is evolving to become a very social thing too. It's embedded in everything around us, even if we're not paying attention to it. So if we want to meet friends, we want to pick a place to eat, or we want to go somewhere. If you're trying to date, you want to swipe right on someone who lives in the same city as you, unless you're me and you date exclusively long distance. But there's a Q&A session out there that we can talk about that more. We won't go into that there. Location is social. Location is also very personal. So I want my location to be reflective of where I am and also who I am. If I have a physical disability, I want to be able to know where the disabled parking spaces are, where the ADA accessible buildings and entrances are. And so we think that maps and location and gaming in the mobile space will come together and really transform the world and create a lot of new different mobile game worlds. So there will be different game modes that are best for your commute to work when you're sitting on the bus. There will be game modes that are better during your lunch break when you're interacting with a lot of people and maybe you can team up with your coworkers to battle something in game. All of these worlds will become really dynamic in real time and reflective, and that's where we think it's going. So this transition for maps and for gaming is a little bit different. For maps, the transition from static to dynamic to real time is more straightforward because maps was already reflecting the real world. It just had to do it a bit better. But for games, if we want games to reflect the real world, we have to be able to mix realities. We have to be able to mix the game world and interactions in the real world. And so this is where AR comes in, and we'll touch on it briefly today. But essentially, the idea of having AR that works for games is that it has to accomplish roughly two things. We need, one, AR to make blended reality look good. We can't have a very janky experience walking around that I have interacted with that before and run into the street many times. Secondly, we also have to have AR be able to power these social and multiplayer experiences. Games and location-based games specifically are very, very social experiences, and so having an AR object that only I can see and interact with is not very much fun. I want to be able to interact with other people. And so Google is really placing big bets on AR now. We're getting the technology to a point where we can accomplish both of these tasks, and we can create these games that mix realities. And so to summarize this background, right now we have a lot of very rich location data that's becoming much more real-time and dynamic and representative of the world. The mobile gaming market is exploding, and then also our AR technology is maturing enough to be able to handle these use cases. And so we're getting to the point where this mobile gaming industry is at a tipping point, and we want to help you to now turn your real world into the playground. So at Google, we made an offering specifically for games. We want to help game developers, and we want to empower the game developers to create these global multiplayer mixed reality experiences. And I'll show you a little bit of how we do that. So this is our platform, And the goal for it was essentially to create these global multiplayer mixed reality games and make it very easy for developers to do that. And in doing so, we created a developer demand-driven product. And we really wanted to talk to developers who were actually building games to figure out what they were looking for. And we found out that they were looking for roughly 3 things. They were looking for no things. Okay, the first thing that they were looking for was access to Google Maps data. So this isn't just a static map. This is the real representation of the living, breathing, changing world. We make 25 million edits a day to Google Maps to reflect the pace at which the real world is changing. And this is all backed by the same infrastructure that serves billions of requests to Google Maps a day. So game developers really wanted access to this data, from building shapes to opening hours of landmarks to reviews and ratings of certain businesses. The second thing that they wanted is for this location data to be built into the game engines that they were using. They wanted to be able to have access to the game development tools as they had location access. And so we brought the real world into Unity. And we're doing the heavy lifting for you, so you don't actually need any experience with location or map data. You can just focus on what you do best, which is build the rich game experiences. And finally, game developers wanted to design interactions based on real-world places. Now, this seems very logical and very straightforward as a concept, but it's actually a really fascinating challenge. So I'll walk you through an example of why. So imagine you're building a scavenger hunt, and your task is to tell people where to go and what to do once they get there. So this is kind of hard if you're designing it for a city that you already live in, but doable. Now imagine if you had to design the same scavenger hunt for a city on the other side of the world that you've never been to, or that you never will. Or imagine if you have to design this scavenger hunt to work for every rural, urban, suburban town in the world, for every player, and make it fun and rewarding for everyone. That's a very hard problem, and that's the problem that designers face when they're building a location-based game. And to add to that, game developers need a lot of context of the world in order to actually make a fun and engaging scavenger hunt. They need to know what are people taking pictures of? Does that mean it's something interesting? Where are people asking for directions to? What's something that might be off the beaten path that people should get rewarded for finding? What places downtown are maybe more vibey or interesting that people would want to explore? There are a lot of these signals that you need to take in to figure out what is a good game, but then you have to prioritize them in order to serve the perfect task at the perfect place for that person at that moment in time. And as a bonus, these things change all the time. So an area like Financial District of San Francisco, where I just flew from, is very busy in the middle of the day, but at night it's a ghost town. There are shopping malls that during the day are bustling and at night turn into restricted construction zones. So we need this real-time data to really understand where to put these great points. And that's a very, very hard problem now. So we're trying to help solve this problem, and we built the Playable Locations Api to do so. So what we do is we take the map, and then we start by focusing on the everywhere. We find all points in the world that could be great for gameplay. So this could be businesses, this could be public historical monuments, cultural places of interest. We want to focus on getting as widespread of the points as we can to solve the problem of someone opening up the game and not having anything to play. That's a very boring experience for a game. So we want to make sure it's all covered. And then we go through and we remove the points that are not safe for gameplay. So for instance, we don't want people playing in the middle of the body of water or in the middle of roads. That's very dangerous. There are also contextual clues that we need in order to really decide what makes for great gameplay. So for instance, on a map, a park and a cemetery look quite similar, but serve very different cultural purposes, and we want to be able to help game developers distinguish that. And that is a hard problem when you think about it. So we now take a bunch, so after we have these points, we rank them based on a number of signals. So for instance, recognizability is a very good playability component because if you're able to recognize something, like the London Eye in the background, it's much easier to situate yourself in the game. But if you don't know where you're going or what you're looking for, that's not a very fun game. And so we try to balance these signals of recognizability, prominence, uniqueness, accessibility, and create the best set of points to give to developers. But obviously, the best set of points is also subjective and based on the type of game you're trying to build. So for instance, if you're trying to build a game for millennials, they may want to interact with each other in public spaces. And so you want to give them points in the game that are busy or can have lots of fun interactions. What if you were trying to build a fitness app? You maybe want to encourage people to go running, so you would want to put these points along jogging paths or boardwalks or beaches. And maybe you want a game that fits in seamlessly with someone's commute or their brunch plans, so you put them at cafes, you put them by the Starbucks that they normally go to. So earlier we were talking about how location is inherently very personal and very relevant, and this gives you the ability to take the context of the real world and the context you know about the player and really mix those together to design a very personal gameplay. So we give a number of attributes to help developers then figure out where to put their game objects where and how. So place type is one good example of this. For instance, you might not want places of type police station to show up in your game, but you might want to turn every place of type park into a castle and put that in your game. If you're designing a game, for instance, and you want to be very literal, you could build treasure chests at actual banks, you could put provisions at grocery stores, and you could put power-ups at doctor's offices. And just by using place type, which is the very tip of the iceberg of what we're giving you with the API, you're able to create a game that works anywhere from downtown Tokyo all the way to rural Australia. So you can see by just defining these three place types, they're already filling up the map here and giving a very rich game environment. And you'll see what this looks like on the other side of the world as well. So by doing this, we make sure that a game developer only has to design the game once, and then we make it work everywhere where Google Maps works, which is in over 220 countries. So that's fundamentally a few billion things that you don't have to worry about. So we've talked a little bit about gameplay and how we stage the interactions there. So let's actually look at some maps and how you would style them. So we're bringing the real world in Unity. This is Manhattan, visually rendered by what we've created, which is the Google Maps Unity SDK. And we give you the ability to take a blank canvas and style it however you want. So in this example, we see the map turned into a very futuristic theme. You see the buildings, parks, roads turned into the sci-fi fantasy novel. And we give developers the ability to customize their games however they want to in a very easy way, and we just give the building data. Now, say, for instance, you want maybe a medieval scene. You could do that too and style it this way so that you have dragons flying around and it looks much more medieval than before. You can also do this Psychedelic Candyland scene, which is my favorite because I would walk around in a world with floating donuts and gummy bears and play in it. So you can do whatever you want. And then we've also given a number of pieces of metadata to help you customize the game to how you want. So for instance, if we go into this demo editor, we're able to change shops to candy bars. We can take restaurants and turn them into gingerbread houses. And we also give you the tools to, for example, adjust the heights of buildings very easily. So you can customize your game world however you want to. So that's a little bit about styling. I'll show you what it looks like to actually add some gameplay here. So keep in mind, we're still looking at Manhattan here, but whatever we apply to Manhattan in this scene will automatically be applied through the API to every other part of the world. So let's say we want to put some missions here at very prominent places in the world. So these green dots here represent the prominent places that are designated under the hood of the Playable Locations API that I mentioned earlier. If you set the density and then apply, then you get these funky rainbows flying around. You can also put candy stands at shops. So we'll do that, and then make sure they don't overlap with the missions. And then you can also put gummy bears at, say, restaurants. And note that it might be a very good time to have multiplayer gummy bear battles because restaurants tend to have very social atmospheres, and you would get that information from us. If you preferred a medieval theme, these things translate, so it could be dragons instead of funky rainbows. And if you preferred a sci-fi scene, this could be spaceships and floating loot instead. Now, keep in mind that all of this is built inside the Unity. So whenever we hit stop, the world then goes blank, because all of this is generated on the fly based on the player's location. And so here are just a smattering as we fly through some other features that are here. We give you 9 slicing to let you style buildings of any shapes. If you want to put gargoyles on buildings, you can with these parapets. We show borderings to help with shading and depth. And then we give road names and building names to help a player better orient themselves in the game. We integrate very nicely with Unity's day and night cycle to create a very beautiful world. And everything that we're building here is mobile optimized because we are focusing on mobile and location-based games. And finally, this fun, very dramatic demo of how we're incorporating with the Unity physics engine. We basically allow things to be exploded and interacted with according to the real world's geometry. That was very dramatic. It's always very dramatic. I'm glad I turned the volume down, so usually it's very hard to talk over that. So that's a few of the features. Now, I want to talk you through a little bit of how we can push the platform and some examples of doing this. So here's a demo scene that was built with a little bit of a different style than the last scene was. So this is a procedurally generated world based on an actual city layout. But Adam Goodrich of Procedural Worlds, he took this layout and then he built in his own city elements. So if we zoom in, you can see the level of detail that you're able to create with the styling engine. You can see the porches, the tables, you can see cars driving by, you can see people interacting with each other. So another example here is done by the same artist. It's also a world based on the actual city view. But these buildings are very cool. They're built out of modular components and then stylized to match how the actual cityscape is styled. And so Adam built this in just a few weeks, just by himself, and we think it's very impressive the level of detail that he's able to reach. You can see the stairways and the fire escapes, and then soon it will pan over and you can see the very detailed amount of city. All of these are procedurally generated, from the clouds to the trees that he's putting in the parks, but all based on the understanding of the real world. And then this final example is from Glacier National Park, Montana. And it's showing us going through the roads, and everything from the patches of vegetation to the forests, to the clouds, everything is procedurally generated down to each blade of grass. And so he's achieving a very extreme level of detail here. And I think the great part about this example is that it shows that you can style rich gameplay, not just in urban city centers where there's lots of points of interest, but in these open world rural environments, so you can style it anywhere you want in the world. So we launched this platform in March at GDC, and since then we've had 5 games launch. Every game that's launched, I lose like an hour of productivity a day at work because I have to play them. So I'll take you through a little bit of what our developers are building and what we think the platform is capable of. So this first game is called Yokai Watch World. It's available in Japan. And the premise of it is that you have a yokai radar, and you're able to catch yokai cat characters and place them on other gamers in the world. And as they move about the world through the different prefectures of Japan, you collect points and level up your yokai. The second example here is The Walking Dead, which was built by Next Games in collaboration with AMC's Hit. And so this idea is that you are in this post-apocalyptic world. You're trying to fight zombies and stay alive. It's an AR location-based game where you can team up with people both near you and on other sides of the world, collect characters, complete these missions, build safe havens, and generally stay alive. It has a very eerie intro sound that always accidentally plays on full volume when I'm in an elevator trying to be quiet. So if we take a look into the actual gameplay, you see this post-apocalyptic map-looking world. And the idea that Next Games wanted was to take a familiar world and put it in an unfamiliar setting. So what Riku, who's a director at Next Games, said is they really took advantage of the buildings and the landmarks that we provided, especially in big cities, because it was very distinct and it made the game feel alive. But at the same time, they feel like they have barely scratched the potential of what the maps have been able to give them. Now, when we were working with Next Games, we also encountered a very interesting phenomenon because we realized that in every country, there's a bespoke set of considerations that we wouldn't have otherwise thought of. So in Finland, where Next Game is based, there's this concept called free roam, where you're able to openly roam into any forested area regardless of who owns it. So this makes for very great, vastly playable regions. However, in the US or in Taiwan, where there are cornfields or rice paddies that look the same on the map, roaming into those lands are very bad because it would destroy the crops. So just knowing that something was of type forest wasn't actually enough for us. We needed the context of the country and the culture to really understand what that meant. And so that becomes a very hard problem, but one that was made a lot easier with the Playable Locations API. The third game here is a game built by Mixi. It's called Monster Strike. It's their wildly popular game. They've actually been released for about 5 years, but what Monster Strike did was actually add a location-based map element onto their game 5 years later. So as you guessed it, the game is about monsters. And so now people can go to real-life mon-stops and collect loot that levels up their monsters. And it's really exciting to see existing games also want to add an element of location on. Mixi wanted to re-engage their users and boost their engagement and retention, and we've seen that in the few months after launch. Now the players can play from their home or at work or at their favorite coffee shop too. So that's very exciting for us. Fourth, we have no more games. So we have Jurassic World Alive, built by Ludia. So this is the second in their Jurassic World series. And the idea is that you're part of these dinosaur quest teams, and you want to tranquilize, then rescue dinosaurs, and then battle with them. So the unique thing with Ludia is that their dinosaurs, as you'll see in 2 seconds, are very, very high fidelity. Okay, there was supposed to be a loud scream. It's not as exciting when there's not. But if we look a little bit closer at their gameplay, Ludia really wanted the dinosaurs to stand out and the map to be secondary. So what they did was actually they made their dinosaurs very high fidelity, and then they lowered all of their building heights. So you can see here, the dinosaurs are the first thing that you see, and they really stand out. So they chose to customize it that way. And there are dinosaurs that spawn in different places based on different characteristics. So for instance, toothy dinosaurs spawn near your dentist, whereas certain dinosaurs spawn more at night or during the day or by water. There's also a great AR component here with Jurassic World Alive, where you can see this dinosaur roaming around Manhattan. And this is powered by AR Core on Android, and this is a very successful example of this. And Ludia also didn't compromise on safety. So they used the Playable Locations API to make sure that people weren't going into no trespassing zones or going into places that were unsafe, but at the same time, bringing players together in points of interest that allowed for a lot of social interaction. And finally, we had Ghostbusters World, launched yesterday. It's fresh off the press, so you can go download it now. But this is a location-based AR game that follows a first-person shooting mechanism where you go around and you capture ghosts. I was doing this in our YouTube office yesterday, and there was someone standing right in front of me, looking at me very strangely. There's Ghostbusters. So if you look at this screenshot of the Ghostbusters game, you see London Eye in the background, and that makes a very powerful connection between the game and the real world, because when you can see a real world artifact in the actual game, it makes the game feel a lot more real and connected there. And so that's something that they really took advantage of in their game. So we're super excited about all these games launching. There are a lot more coming soon, and we hope that there will be a lot more coming later as well. But to summarize a bit, we wanted to accomplish 3 to 4 main things when building this platform. So one, we wanted to help developers build dynamic worlds at scale. So with this, you'll have access to hundreds of millions of points of interest, building shapes, landmarks, opening times, all of that rich information. And it's all backed by the same infrastructure as Google Maps. Second, we wanted to let game developers be able to customize their world in a way that suited exactly their gameplay's needs. So this could be something as simple as turning lakes into lava flows, or totally swapping out the geometry of the real world and putting in a prefab model, or just styling the roads and the buildings a different color. Third, we wanted developers to be able to find the best points in the real world to play games. We wanted to be able to help you customize where you put your most rare dragon, where you put certain characters, and what they're doing there. And then finally, we want to be able to let developers do this at scale. So we're building this on Google's infrastructure. So there's fast serving, fast response time, and guaranteed scaling. So you can design the game once, hit play, and know that it will work anywhere that Google Maps works. So we're super excited about this, and we're also here to collaborate. So we're in a limited release right now, but we'd love to get in touch with anyone who has an idea or is building a real-world game already, or who has an existing game. So head over to developers.google.com/maps/gaming, and we would love to chat. So thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.